Everyone, thanks so much for jumping on today. As you've probably seen, really what we're trying to do here is talk about outbound sales, talk about how we sort of scale that and how we sort of improve our engagement rates. And I really want to introduce this concept to you, which I'm calling event-based sales, which is basically sort of flipping it on its head and talking about how we look at measuring intent of people out there in the market who are hopefully going to be buying our services very soon. So just to give you just a quick sort of high-level overview of what we'll be covering. So talk about sort of the evolution of sales targeting. What are people doing and how have we sort of evolved over time? Talk about the dark side of scaling outreach. So we've all been running email campaigns, I'm sure. What's some of the downsides to that? How you can sort of move to an event or an intent-based sort of sales model, and then we'll talk about some real-world examples and look at sort of Q&A from there as well. So basically, where a lot of this started for me is it working at a business that I felt as a SaaS company. I felt that we had probably the best product in the market, and in my mind, I would say, well, if we've got the best product, we should just be able to go and find people who need it. They'll buy it, and it'll be the simplest job ever, and we'll all be rich, and we'll be able to retire early. What I quickly found out was that was not the case, and it really took me a while to try to work out why that was. And I think really what it comes down to is sort of the information. So normally when we're working sort of in technology, where we're innovating, we're building sort of disruptive, innovative products. Really, what it comes down to is buyers just don't know what they don't know. They might not necessarily know they need the solution. They might not be sort of aware of it. But at the same time, the actual software companies and the businesses themselves, they don't know all of the companies that are out there in the market. If they did, they could just go directly to them. And if they knew that, which problems that these businesses were having, we could sort of speak directly to them about what those problems are and get them solved. But unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. And really, what it comes down to is, sellers, so people who are running these software companies, we need to sort of be able to discover who's out there in the market, who's ready to buy, sort of either as quickly or as efficiently as possible, so they don't get snapped up by your competitors. But also we really need to make sure it's profitable to do that. So if we're spending more money than we make in order to sort of win a sale, then we're going to go out of business or burn through all of our capital pretty quickly. So what I want to sort of do today is sort of step through maybe some better ways we can sort of think about it and some new techniques on that side. So just check you guys are all still with me, and I'll keep running through the slides.
For sure.
Yep.
Awesome.
Yep.
All right. So when I sort of think about the evolution of sales targeting, I'm not sure which of you have sort of seen Wolf of Wall Street or any of those sort of finance sales films, but one of them being Boiler Room. The evolution of this is really, if you can think about, you go out there in the market, there's a bunch of businesses, who can we sell to? If we do sort of no targeting at all, I think people call this like dialing for dollars. Imagine you get the phone book out and you just sort of go down from A, B, C, and you just basically call everyone and see if they want to buy what you're selling. If you're selling really high margin sort of penny stocks and basically running a fraudulent financial business, as some people have done, then that's probably pretty profitable for you. But for everyone else, we tend to avoid this because you end up harassing a lot of people that have no need for your product, and it's massively expensive. So what we do is, rather than sort of just go out to everyone in the market, we try to do some sort of basic segmentation. So whether that's industry or its size, sometimes we go a step further and look at personas. So we might say, okay, if you're a CTO or you're an operations manager, you might be interested in what we're doing, and that's pretty much where a lot of people stop, and seems to work okay. And there's some techniques that we have for sort of getting over some of the limitations there, but there's kind of a further bit that you can drill down on, which is sort of event, intent, or behavior-based targeting. And this is basically where we're looking at people in the market who are exhibiting certain behaviors that tell us that they need our solution. And that's basically what we're going to be talking about today, is how do we really hone in on those guys that are really having that pain, and try to identify and make sure we're sort of staying front of mind for those guys first, and then sort of filtering down into everyone else into that basic segmentation bit. So, really, what's the goal here? What are we trying to do? Well, the idea is, okay, if we target people better, that means we're gonna have better engagement, and ultimately drive down our acquisition cost. So, if we know that someone has a problem that we can solve, they're way more likely to want to chat to us about it. They're way more likely to be interested in sort of, giving up 30 minutes or an hour of their time to jump on a demo, or however you're selling. And really, that's gonna drop that acquisition cost, and help you get more leads through the door. So that's the goal. But there's a couple of things that sort of stand in our way there in terms of really achieving that. And one of it is really what I'm sort of calling the sort of data problem, which is really depending on sort of the size of the business that you're working with. So, you could be working with a, say, FTSE 200 company, some of the biggest ones in the UK, all the way down to sort of small operators. But depending on how big that business is, you're going to be able to get a different level of data based on them clearly. So, a FTSE 200 business will be doing all kinds of, regulatory declarations. They'll have, thousands of employees that, are all active on social media. All of their investment decisions are pretty much public knowledge because they're public companies and they have to disclose them. But as they sort of come down, they come into that private space. You get less data kind of on the regulatory space. You can still get quite a lot of information. They still have fairly big footprints on social media, and we can sort of discover their email addresses using sort of a Zoom info or something like that. But as it goes further and further down, we get less and less data on them. So you can imagine a small corner shop or a small restaurant or something with basically a sort of a single founder kind of running it. There might be very little data we can get on that at all. So really, I think the trick to some of this is sort of finding them where they're sort of high enough up on that pyramid where we can get the data that we need to sort of tell us, okay, whether they're in the market or not. And that will sort of drive a lot of this. So the inverse of that, though, is it's gonna take you way longer to sell to a FTSE 200 business than a single site kind of restaurant. So there's trade-offs that we make there. But really, it's kind of breaking through this problem in terms of trying to find the data sets that we need in order to tell us whether people are in the market or they're having pains that we can solve. So, this is a problem. Imagine we're doing some of that basic segmentation. So, we build a database where we've got people who are, say they're restaurants. So we've got a database of, say 500 restaurants, and we just go and email them. Say on the other hand, we had a database of 100 restaurants, but we know, based on some things that we've measured, that they really need a solution for whatever it is that we're selling. Historically, we haven't been able to get that data. So basically, the way we've had to kind of overcome it is basically just to scale our outreach. So using sort of email automation platforms, using all of the different techniques that we use to try to scale what we're doing. We basically found that, okay, in this sort of high targeting kind of really high intent based sort of database, you might have 100 people, and this we get a pretty good engagement rate, maybe say 50 or something, end up clicking through, and then maybe we get 20 or 30 who end up looking to set a demo. So really high engagement, really high close rates going through the stage. But we can end up at ultimately more people through the funnel if we just really front load the front of that. So just this concept of like, all right, we're just going to email everyone in the world, and as long as it doesn't cost us much, sort of marginally, then we can sort of sacrifice having a much sort of lower conversion rate, and we'll end up with more sales in the pipeline. I think that's basically been the conventional wisdom, that we don't really need any more data to target people as long as we're roughly correct, and it doesn't cost us any more, then we can just scale everything. That's stuff I've seen happen a lot, but there is a dark side to that, and I think a lot of people are starting to take note, particularly some of the tech companies, particularly regulators. They're starting to look at, okay, are we invading people's privacy You know, and are we sort of abusing the market by, you know, emailing, you know, let's say you have to email 1,000 people in order to get, you know, 10 who are interested. You know, you could see that then the argument is, okay, if we scale that to 100,000 people, maybe we'll be able to get 100 people who are interested. That's like a lot of people that we're pestering. And a lot of people are quite motivated to try and cut down on that. So, you know, the ICO, which is the data controller in the UK, they're you know, starting to become more litigious about, you know, really high volume outbound calls. So there's quite a few fines that they've issued there recently. On the LinkedIn platform, they've recently introduced a bunch of controls around how many people you can invite. So it used to be basically a free for all, and now they basically said you can only invite 100 a week, which is still quite high, but you can see them sort of trying to restrict some of that more and more. And we've seen some moves from Apple recently, which we've wrote a bit about, which is basically sort of removing or obscuring the ability of marketers to reliably track open rates and IP addresses and do location-based targeting. So I think basically the privacy landscape is going to make a lot of this scaling a lot harder in the future than it is. I'm not sure what you know, some of the email platforms like Gmail and all the rest of it will do here, but you can imagine a future where it becomes harder and harder to do these sort of broad outreaches, you know, as people sort of become more and more sensitive to the privacy aspects of it. So that's something that we're a bit concerned about, and we sort of want to find a way to kind of reduce that spam that's being produced. So, you know, we sort of laid it out. I mean, you know, what we would like to do is target people better. You know, find the ones who have the pain. You know, find the right messaging for them. You know, bring them in and at a lower acquisition cost. But we can't always get the data we need, right? So we try to scale our way out of it, which works for a while. But you know, we can see that that's making all of the channels noisier, right? So if everyone has the same idea of just, okay, we'll email everyone in the market, you know, I imagine quite a few of these, so even to say restaurants, I imagine they probably have gone from getting, you know, maybe 10 cold emails a day to 100. And, you know, you could see a situation moving forward where, you know, that could, you know, they may no longer want to list their publicly facing email address, even for customers, because they get so much spam through it. So I've just got someone. Oh, sorry, Will. I'll get back to you there. So I'll just close the chat. So yeah, so basically, you know, how can we sort of overcome this? You know, what do we need to do? I mean, we know that customers are tuning out our messages. So, you know, what people like Will and other SDRs will be doing is to try to find, you know, more and more personalized kind of outreach that we can do, so we hit them with the right message at the right time. The way we can think about this is, rather than shouting, so rather than, you know, sending these broad scale messages out to everyone, we should be listening. So we can use public data that basically would tell us, okay, what are some events or some triggers that tell us that someone's in the market or they're having some problems that we can solve, and then we can go directly to them just at the right time, kind of with the right messaging. At least that's the goal. That's really where we want to get to, and that avoids us having to, you know, email tens or, you know, hundreds of thousands of people to get to where we need to. So guys, I'm gonna run through basically now, you know, what it looks like to kind of build that bit of a pipeline. But just at this stage, just make sure everyone's following me, and you know, if anyone wanted to raise anything or ask any questions at this stage, is absolutely the right time to do that, or any comments even.
I'm all good. I'm all good.
All good.
Yeah, I'm good too.
Perfect. All right, guys. So this is basically a process that I've taken, you know, with a few clients now. And you know, you sort of need to take 1 or 2 steps back before you can move forward, but it's really helpful for your sales process to do so. So the 4 steps, we're going to map that awareness cycle. So I'm going to show you what that is. We're going to define what some key events in that awareness cycle are. So those are going to be our triggers that tell us when it's time to, you know, to do that outreach. We're going to find and we're going to collect data publicly available that can sort of support us in order to make those decisions. and then we're going to drive our campaigns sort of in real time off the back of those. But just before I do get into that, I'm going to talk about just quickly about this concept of sort of motivation, so the motivation to buy versus awareness. And then that'll help us understand these next bits a little bit better. So I think this is the awareness cycle. I mean, really, it's marketing 101. You may have heard some version of this, or you may have seen it in a marketing textbook. But there's this idea that basically when people don't just overnight decide they want to buy a new CRM or whatever solution it is. There's a series of steps they go through in order to get there. So they start off being unaware, so that they're not aware that they have a problem even to solve. So they're kind of blissfully ignorant of this, and these are probably the vast majority of the market, particularly if you're selling something that's like new and it's disruptive, or it's something that's not well known. But at a certain point, there'll be some pain they feel, there'll be some problem that they end up with because something's happened in their business or what have you, and they become aware of the problem. And at this point, they're only aware of the problem. You can think of this like, say you go to a doctor, like say you've got, I don't know, a rash shows up on your arm, or I don't know, some ailment. You look at that and you think, wow, that's not good. I need to go and see a doctor. And you become aware of the problem, but you don't know what the solution is at that stage. So you're only aware that you've got a problem. When you go to the doctor, they tell you, okay, you've got this skin thing happening, and this is how you would fix it. Basically you need some sort of cream or something. So you become aware then of a solution, which is good. And at that point, you can then go to the chemist and buy a product that will actually then help you with that. At some point, say you're so happy with that that you become an evangelist, so you start telling more and more people about it, and these are existing customers. So for the points of this discussion, we're sort of less interested in the sort of evangelists or the product aware, but you can start to see that if you can kind of insert yourself into this awareness cycle, you can meet people at their level of awareness, and then sort of steer them towards understanding the product, understanding the problem better, being in a better position to then suggest a solution. And then that helps you immensely when it comes to them becoming aware of the products, because you can completely control the narrative when they're out there looking at you versus your competitors, for instance. So it's important to understand that. The second one, just quickly, is understanding this concept of sort of extrinsic versus intrinsic motivation. Big words, but really what I'm getting at here is, when people make a buying decision, generally it's for two reasons. One, because there's some sort of outside challenge to the business. You could put COVID, you could put Brexit, you could put a competitor, big competitor coming into the market, kind of in that category. So they're seeing an outside shock and they're trying to do something in order to respond to it. But then you've also got intrinsic motivation. So this is kind of an internal process that happens in their business, and they're trying to work out, okay, how do we go and capture an opportunity? How do we go and act on the market? And those two things are quite different in terms of how they go and they make a decision there. And that's going to be key when we start looking at how we build that pipeline. So step one, so if we're going to move, say, to an intent or an event-based process here, the first thing we need to do is sort of map this awareness cycle. So we sit down and we try to think about, okay, for an average prospect, an average customer, sort of to be, what does it look like for them to be unaware? So, Will, as an SDR, I'm sure you hear things like, yeah, we're happy with our current solution. Things are working well enough. When you press them, they don't have a timeline or a budget. I mean, this person is basically unaware of a problem, or it's not big enough for them to solve. It's not sort of burning. And sales organizations, we waste huge amounts of time here, basically talking to people who have no basically burning desire to buy what we're selling. And the most efficient thing to do is to educate them better, but to get off the phone and try to find people who are at least aware of the problem. So you can see, as we sort of then come down to this problem where where there's a whole group of people here, they're kind of, it's a bit of an uneasy stage because they're unhappy with their current solution, but they're not sure how to fix it. So they haven't been able to sort of diagnose it. I think this is where the SDR function does really well, because you can hook people kind of with this kind of overarching messaging around, there might be staffing issues or profitability, these sorts of things. People are open to solutions because they know they have a problem, but they haven't actually put in the effort, and they might not even be expert enough to work out how to solve it. And then at some point, say it's a, I don't know, profitability issue, then they might think, okay, well, maybe we can save costs on XYZ using a piece of software. And this is the point where they've arrived at understanding, okay, we need to buy a solution for that. They don't necessarily know which is the best one, because there might be 2 or 10 or 20 different competitors out there in the market, but they've sort of found, okay, well, this is the solution that we're going to be. Now we need to go and talk to all the different vendors and kind of work it out. So you can see, depending on which stage they're in, you're going to have a very different conversation with them. And this is kind of really where when we miss the mark here, this is really where we don't get that engagement at all. If we're talking about what we often do, talking about solutions or even products to people who are unaware, they're just not at all going to be interested in it, and they're going to be pretty upset that we're wasting their time. So it's important to map that. But then step 2 is sort of to define these key events. So they're unaware, and then they go to being problem aware. Is there, that's an event, that's something that's happened, that they've now become aware of the problem. And when it comes, you can see when it comes to sort of extrinsic versus intrinsic sort of motivation, when COVID first hit, people very quickly became problem aware of a bunch of things. We saw a bunch of things happening in the market. Even more recently, staff shortages and supply chain issues. We can sort of measure a lot of those things as things that people would be very obviously aware of. But you can also see there's some other key events there in terms of becoming aware of the problem and then realizing that they needed a solution and kind of roughly what that solution looks like. And then when they come from being solution aware to product aware, that's really what we call inbound sales, right? So they're looking for a solution, they land on your website, they like what they see, they sign up. So, for the purposes of this, when we're going out to the market, we're really interested in these top 2. So how do we understand when people have become aware of the problem? How do we understand when people are sort of open to looking at a solution? And those are sort of 2 lenses that we can use there. The third step then is to find data sources that we can use that tell us when one of those key events has happened. And this is a skill, and you're not always going to be able to do it, but you might also be able to find ways that you can approximate it. So there's lots of stuff out there. So there's customer and employee reviews. So there's quite a lot of companies out there, particularly if they're a restaurant, or they've been sort of more existing business and they're getting sort of reviews on Google. We can look at reviews that they're getting. And not just in terms of like 1 to 5 stars, but we can also look at what are people saying about that business. Are they happy with the price? Are they happy with the features? What about the customer service? Those are all things that can kind of tell us interesting things that can tell us whether they've sort of crossed one of those thresholds. But also employee reviews. So you might be sort of more on the staffing side, and understanding how that's kind of trending is helpful as well. Obviously, social media footprint. So what are people posting? What are the comments on there? What are people saying? And also, how is the business representing itself to the broader market? Can we use that information? As the business gets bigger, we can use government or regulatory filings. If the company is big enough, they will literally post their strategy in their annual returns. You can clearly read them and sort of find out what's coming up over the next sort of 12 to 18 months. And then, interestingly, hiring trends as well. So, before companies tend to do just about anything, they may well bring in, senior management. They might invest heavily in, building out a sales function. There might be a key hire they've made from a competitor. We can look at all of those things, and that can tell us. We almost get a glimpse of some of that intrinsic motivation. What are they gearing up to do moving forward in the market? So there's a range of data sources. We've actually got. I've actually compiled a list of a lot of the handy ones, which I'll send through to you guys as well. And you should probably help me get that into a pretty looking format. But that might give you a couple of ideas on the back end of this of some different data sources that you can look at. But the final step really is then to tie all of that data together into your sort of marketing tech stack, right? So you've got a CRM that should really start holding some of this data that tells you, what level of awareness you think these people are at, or maybe collect some data that tells you, whether you think they're out there in the market. But that then really needs to drive your sales automation. So, we're probably running automated email campaigns, probably got tasks that are being created to call people. The idea really is, if we've detected there's some sort of, sort of extrinsic motivator that's moving someone into that problem aware space, we really want to get onto that as soon as possible. So like as an example, and we'll run through some real world examples, if a restaurant is worried about their customer service, they get a really bad negative review, the sooner we can get to them, the more likely that negative review is going to be in their head when we're talking to them about, okay, how can we help you improve customer service, that sort of thing. But then the final bit is just pulling in that sales content, right? Because they've got a problem, we're claiming we're going to fix it, but we need to prove it. So we need to have sales content that basically goes directly at that, directly at the problem and is like very personalized. So this can be your email templates, this can be PDFs and videos we make. It could be a whole range of stuff that speaks directly to that, that helps drive that engagement and that sort of stickiness. So this sort of tech bit on the back is very important as well, because we're going to be collecting data at scale here in order to drive these campaigns. So I'm going to run through 2 real world examples, and then I'll stop talking at you, and we'll go through a bit of a Q&A, because that's really where I want to get to and try and add some value if there's any questions you guys have, or anything that you can sort of take away. So 2 real world examples. So the client that I had selling solutions into the hospitality industry, we knew they knew they wanted to reach businesses that are opening up, and this is one of those things in restaurants where there's so many restaurants that go out of business every year, and there's so many new ones that get created. I mean, particularly during COVID, there's a heap that have gone out of business, but there'll be a heap of new ones that replace them. And when a new business opens up, they go and they buy all the new solutions that are out there in the market. So they'll get an inventory management system. They'll get a ordering system. They'll get stuff for their staffing. They'll get payroll. They'll buy all of those new things off the shelf. So the idea is that the sooner you can reach them when they're out there in the market, the more likely they are to not have yet looked at a competitor. So they're more likely to be in that sort of problem aware space rather than a product aware space. So the idea is, okay, then how do you kind of target these businesses? What data do we have? Well, it turns out that in the UK, Companies House, which is the government organisation responsible for managing that data, is very transparent. So when a business is registered, it's almost instantly posted on the Companies House website. But you can freely visit and collect that information. You can look at the industry. You'll have addresses and contact information for people. And this is where something like a direct mail campaign can be super helpful, because you can target them sort of out of their probably most likely their place of business or their home address. And one of the great things, one of the only good things that come out of COVID was sort of the rise of the QR code. We've been seeing direct mail campaigns perform incredibly well, because in the past you would send someone a letter or some sort of form of sort of written communication. They would then need to go and type or Google your name, and then they would basically end up on your website. now they can scan a QR code and you can really well attribute that. So that's one sort of example in terms of really kind of getting into that awareness point between unaware and problem aware, targeting them kind of immediately, and then being able to sort of track that back into driving more traffic to the website. Second one I'll leave you with, so this is sort of an email campaign that we ran for a client, but it's no secret that in the UK and pretty much all around the world, businesses are facing a staffing crisis. There's a bunch of businesses out there that have staffing solutions, so people that can help businesses that are really labor intensive, like warehousing and logistics and even hospitality, with solutions. The idea is, okay, how do we find businesses that are really crying out for staff? There might be some that are more affected than others. So what we did is we looked at some of the job posting data. So we collected job posts across a range of platforms, analyzed them to work out, okay, who's posting the most jobs, who has jobs that aren't filling, which ones are kind of paying over market in order to get people, which ones are saying they're urgent, and then going straight to those people. And particularly if we can get the details of the hiring manager, that means we can give super targeted messaging from there. So we were getting sort of upwards of 40-50% click-through rates on some of the email campaigns that we were running in here, because it was directly to a named person with like a really high interest, high intent, really highly personalized message, and that really sort of cut through a lot of the noise.